What is going on, Fight Feeders? Welcome back to Fight Feed. We've got a special guest today for the UFC Fight Night that is happening on 11/1. That is November 1, 2025. Special guest Charles Lee Ray, otherwise known as Chucky, is joining us for the picks to celebrate Halloween. So, guys, this Fight Night event is definitely not one of the best ones that we've had. Okay, we do have the Mean Machine Steve Garcia as the headliner against David Onama. That is a fun fight. I definitely see it going a certain way. You guys will understand that as you get further into my prediction video here. And we've got the return of Norma Dumont. She's been out for quite a bit. She had a stellar performance in her last outing, which was quite some time ago, but finally getting a chance to, crack at one of these contenders and actually probably write her name in for being the next contender should she get a win here. In addition to that, we got Phil Rowe, Orlando's finest. Although he's not from Orlando, he lives there now. Shout out to Phil Rowe. He's coming back. He's going to be fighting that young, hungry prospect in Seok Koi, I think he's how you say his name. The guy that beat Oban Elliott in his last outing. And how can we forget? We've got Boom Gang himself, Cedriqes Dumas, coming back after getting a really bad nut shot in his last outing. He is actually welcoming a 2025 Dana White's Contender Series contract winner in Donte Johnson. Should be a fun scrap at middleweight. Outside of that, guys, a bunch of other fights that are, in that like mid-tier to low-tier range from a height perspective. Regardless, just like every fight card, we're going to give this one the same amount of attention and love because we love to watch fights every Saturday. Am I right? So give this video a like. Let's go ahead and dive in, guys, to the first fight of the night. Chucky, take us away. All right? You're not going to do anything? Got it. I'll just fucking do everything. All right, guys, the first fight of the night, we've got Talita Alencar versus Ariane Carnelossi. Okay, Carnelossi, my fucking word. Look at her goddamn arms. Holy shit. She's Carnelossi, as Guru said before, she's like the Italian variant of Brazilian, right? Very interesting. So in this fight, we got Talita Alencar, 35, 5'1", 58.5-inch reach, 6 wins, 1 loss. She's got a 2-1 record in the UFC. Ariane Carnelossi is 32 years old, so a bit younger, 5'2", so she's a bit taller. 61.5-inch reach, a little bit longer. 15 wins, 3 losses, 3-2 record in the UFC. When we break down these ladies' wins, losses, all that stuff. So taking a look at Talita Alencar, she has 0 wins by KO, so 0% there. 3 wins by submission, a 50% submission rate. 3 wins by decision, so a 50% decision rate, giving her a 50% finish rate overall. When we look at Ariane Carnelossi, she has 9 wins by way of knockout with a 60% KO rate, 2 wins by way of submission, a 13% submission rate, and 3 wins by decision, a 20% decision rate, giving her an overall finish rate of 73%. When we look at their losses, okay, Talita Alencar has only lost once, and that was by way of decision. So she has 100% of her losses by decision. Carnelossi, on the other hand, she's got a little bit of a mixed bag here, guys. She has lost 3 times, and she's lost by KO once, submission once, decision once, giving her 33% in each category. So when I look at their last 4 fights, Alencar got a win over Vanessa Demopoulos. She is the former stripper turned UFC fighter. Before that, a loss to Stephanie Luciano, a win over Ryan Dos Santos prior to that, and a draw to Stephanie Luciano on Dana White's Contender Series. Alencar has not been very active, guys, so I just want to call that out. Ariane Carnelossi, on the other hand, she last fought against Piedra Rodriguez, where she got a win. Prior to that, she lost to Lupi, or Poopy Godinez, as we like to call her on this channel. Before that, a win over Estela Nunez and a win over Na Liang. So when we just kind of compare the two in their last 4 fights, obviously Carnelossi has been the more successful fighter from a record perspective, 3-1 in her last 4, compared to that of essentially 2-1 on the side of Talita Alencar, okay? Now, similar to what I did last week, guys, I am going to be pulling together the strengths, weaknesses, keys to victory. Try to make this quick, though. I don't want to make a 2-hour video here, so let's dive right into that. So Talita Alencar, guys, her strengths is that she's an elite Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu athlete. She's a multiple-time IBJFF world medalist. She has very high-level submission skills, not only from guard, but also just on top. Very smooth transition, sweeps to her submissions, her excellent body control, positional awareness, all things I took notes on. And then another thing she has is a very solid cardio and pace. She's definitely accustomed to those long grappling exchanges and maintaining aggression throughout. So when you consider her, previous life in, doing the grappling, specifically IBJFF, or IBJF, sorry, I don't know why I keep throwing an extra F in there. But then also, Alencar has a very good ability to scramble, especially if her opponent is initiating a grappling exchange or her opponent is able to hit a reversal. She can kind of scramble out and or recover and reverse submission attempts or takedown attempts as well. So those are all strengths for Talita Alencar. Weaknesses for her, not a very high-level striker, guys. Striking is not her bread and butter. She also has not really been in there with a super high-level striker just yet. Another thing I call out as a weakness for her is she is super reliant on takedowns in her fights. It's like if she's unable to get the takedown, it will completely lessen her chance of getting a win here, okay? So that's something that you have to keep in mind. Another thing is she is 35. She's not that much older than Carnelossi, but she's got the age, like she's getting to that age where, especially at this lighter weight class, you might see diminishing returns in performance just based on her current age at 35. And I think from a physicality perspective, she is going to be at a huge disadvantage against Carnelossi here. Her keys to victory: close distance, get the takedowns, try to maintain a high volume cardio grappling fast, getting Carnelossi to the ground and taking away Carnelossi's ability to land on the feet. Now, Carnelossi, on the other hand, her strengths is that she is in a very aggressive, compact striker, heavy hands, very fast hooks and overhands, pressure-oriented styles. She's going to be wanting to walk her opponent down and hit her with whatever she can, get her back against the cage, and just tee off. A very good knockout power, especially for this division at strawweight. But you also saw, guys, she's yoked as fuck. So that could play into a weakness. We'll have to see. Carnelossi's also very good, like I said, as being a pressure fighter. She does better when her opponent is on the back foot, okay? And I don't think in this exchange or matchup, Carnelossi's going to have to worry about anything coming her way from a striking perspective. Could be dead wrong there, right? We've seen these things happen. Now, weaknesses is that her grappling and ground defense is definitely less proven against someone who's an elite BJJ specialist like that of Alencar. However, she does have, a decent amount of skills in the ground game. I don't think she's going to be able to really light a candle to Alencar is able to do, but she will be able to at least, I think, keep her off of her with her takedown defense. I do think that if Alencar can put this game on her where it's like this heavy cardio, heavy grappling exchanges, that we could start to see Carnelossi fade, right? And that is going to be a weakness that I call out, especially when you consider how yoked she is. You got to fill those muscles with some water, and dude, those muscles are going to need oxygen, right? So she is likely to get tired a lot faster than that of Alencar, okay? That means, in my head, keys to victory for Carnelossi is she has to land hard and often in the starting round, especially round 1 and round 2. I think if she can, keep Alencar on the back foot, keep her at bay from getting those takedown attempts, keep her at bay from getting control against the cage by using her hands, I think Carnelossi has a very good chance of winning this fight. I actually see this one going to decision, and I actually am going to pick Ariane Carnelossi to get it done, guys, because I think that she is just more physical presence in the cage, a bit more active, I think, recently as well. Actually, I'm wrong there. Carnelossi's been out since May of 2024. Actually, her last bout, she got headbutt and was able to get the win that way because her opponent headbutted her. She's not fought since then. So Alencar is actually more active here. However, like I said, I think that side of Carnelossi also having less losses, a lot more fights, she's just going to be a bigger physical presence. And I think that her striking is going to be the game changer here. I'm picking her to get the win by decision. All right, guys, fight number 2 on the card. We got Phil Rowe versus Seok Koi. Okay, this is a welterweight matchup between Phil Rowe and Seok. I'm going to call him Ko. We're just going to call him Ko. Phil Rowe's 35 years old, 6'3" with an 80.5-inch reach, 11 wins, 5 losses in his professional career, 4-3 in his UFC career. Ko, on the other hand, 32 years old, 5'10", 71-inch reach, 12-2 in his professional career, 1-0 in his UFC tenure thus far. Now, taking a look at how both these guys win and lose. Phil Rowe, 7 wins by KO at 64% KO rate, 4 wins by submission at 36% submission rate, a 100% finish rate because Mr. Phil Rowe has 0 decisions on his record. Now, Ko, on the other hand, has 6 wins by KO, which is a 50% KO rate, 0 wins by submission, so 0% there, 6 wins by decision, a 50% decision rate, giving him a 50% finish rate overall. Taking a look at their losses, Phil Rowe has 5 total losses, 1 of those by way of KO, making him have a KO loss percentage of 20%, and then 4 losses by decision, his decision loss percentage being 80%. Now, Ko, on the other hand, he's only lost 2 times, but both of those losses came by way of KO, so he has a KO loss rate of 100%. When we look at their last 4 fights, Phil Rowe had a back-and-forth scrap that he just ended up out-mustarding and outlasting Angelusa to get a finish in the late parts of round 3. That was a win for Phil Rowe there. Before that, a loss to Jake Matthews. Before that, a split decision loss, I believe, to Neil Magny. And before that, a win over Nico Price, okay? Guys, if I'm just looking at last 4 fights, I would actually, and this is a hard one to pick. I already know my pick says Ko, but when I look at their last 4, obviously Phil Rowe has had a way stronger strength of schedule, but Ko is still a bit young. Not that young, though. He's 32. His last win was over the Welsh Gangster and Oban Elliott, which was a huge underdog win. He actually made the list of my underdogs. Check out my underdog video if you guys are curious about that. Before that, a win over Igor Cavalcanti. Before that, a win over Alwyn Kinkai. And before that, a win over Ryuta Sakurai. Okay. Like I said, if you're comparing their last 4 opponents, I think that Phil Rowe has definitely had that better strength of schedule overall. So if we're looking at keys of victory and strengths, weaknesses, obviously Phil Rowe has a very heavy technical striking background, okay? He's got powerful hooks, very good combos with accurate timing, also very long for the weight class at 6'3" and an 80.5-inch reach. That is very long reach for this weight class specifically, but even if you were to go to middleweight, he's still outnumbering a lot of guys there. He has a durable chin and toughness. He absorbs shots well and just keeps coming forward, but we did see him get hurt a little bit against Angelusa. Angelusa is a bit of a fucking powerhouse, though, but just how he's built, right? I would say another thing is that Phil Rowe is never happy with going to decision, and it shows in his stats, right? 0 decision wins on his record. He's always going for a finish. Now, where Phil Rowe lacks, in my opinion, he doesn't have the best grappling consistency. He's been taken down and controlled in spots. His takedown defense can be shaky. Sometimes he can do well with takedowns or even just mounting some defense by having some submission offense. But I would say he also can be reckless with how he enters a lot of the time. Like, this is how he was caught by Angelusa, and I think he got dropped by Angelusa at one point. And then also we did see he did outlast Angelusa in their outing, but Phil Rowe was tired as hell as well. And so you have to consider, cardio could be an issue potentially for him here. His keys to victory in this matchup, guys, is he needs to keep the fight standing. He's got to use his standard pressure. Think if he can cut off the cage and be very offensive with his strikes, landing those strikes from range, I think he needs to definitely use the jab, guys. The reach advantage is very stark here. And if he can keep Ko at range and just land the jab, land the straight punches, he has a chance of not only just, winning the fight by decision, but also potentially catching Ko when Ko is trying to mix it up or get inside the distance. I do think that he should also use feints and heavy hooks so he can exploit Ko's timing and create those finishing opportunities on the feet. And then I think he needs to stay composed defensively, though, and avoid getting swept or tied up on the mat, because Ko, although has the grappling advantage in this matchup, he also has some solid hands. And that's when we look at his last fight against Oban Elliott, we saw him mix that up very well and just completely own Oban Elliott all over the place. Okay. So taking a look at the strengths of Ko, he's a southpaw variety and in awkward angles, right? So he's going to come out with a different look, I think, than most fighters would in this case. He creates different looks for those orthodox type fighters. And so I think that that's going to be a huge plus for him here. He's got very fast speed and very good footwork. Okay. That quick in and out movement. He has very effective counters because of that as well. You saw that on display against Oban Elliott. Another thing is that he has a youthful gas tank. He seems to be solid the entire fight, right? It's not just oh, I can go round one and then I've got to coast the rest. No, he went the entire time last time and really showed Oban Elliott up, in my opinion, showed him levels in terms of what he's able to do out there. Now, some weaknesses, though, is when you consider, although his name is KO, he has been only KO'd in his career. And so that is definitely something to keep in mind, especially going up against a finisher like Phil Rowe, who's got the range, got the height advantage, and potentially in moments, when they're exchanging, maybe better pocket presence too. But I think the one thing that I'll say is another weakness is that Ko does not have that power differential. I think when you consider the fact that, Rowe has 64% of his wins by way of KO and Ko only has 50%, right there, it's just telling that story that obviously in this matchup, Phil Rowe is going to be the probably more heavy-handed striker in these engagements. And so I would also say that when you consider Ko's kind of lack of experience in the UFC, that is, he does not have a ton of experience against elite power punchers or elite boxers in the UFC. Whereas we can look at Phil Rowe and say, okay, like he's gone up against Jake Matthews. He's gone up against Neil Magny, some of these trickier guys in that welterweight division. I think that Ko's keys to victories is using the movement and angles to frustrate Rowe, landing those counter shots. He also needs to circle away from the power side of Phil Rowe, avoid standing toe-to-toe, and capitalize on those countering opportunities. He does not want to be caught at the end of those punches from Phil Rowe, especially at range. I think another thing is he needs to try to bring and mix in those takedowns. He did this very well against Oban Elliott. He was able to mix in the takedowns with the effective countering opportunities. But if he has Rowe on the back foot or thinking about takedowns the entire time, that is going to open up a lot more success, I think, for Ko on the feet. And then also just needs to stay consistent in mixing in the takedowns. Guys, in this matchup, I want to pick Phil Rowe. I want to, but No, I'm going to go with Ko. I think Ko will get it done. I think he's the younger guy here, a lot more to prove. I do think that Phil Rowe, depending on, I would imagine he's probably an underdog here. I would not discredit a Phil Rowe underdog pick, guys, because I think Phil Rowe could get it done, especially if he catches Ko clean on the chin. All right, so keep that in mind. All right, guys, fight number 3 on the card. We got Ardelean versus Montserrat Ruiz. Ardelean, 33 years old, 5'3" with a 62-inch reach. She is 10-7 in her professional career with a 1-2 record in the UFC. She has 4 wins by way of KO, 40%, 4 wins by way of submission at 40%, and 2 wins by way of decision at 20%. Now, giving her overall an 80% finish rate, which is very solid for a strawweight, specifically in the women's division. When we look at Ardelean's losses, guys, she's lost 2 by way of submission, 29% of her losses by way of submission, that is. And then 5 of her losses by way of decision, which is 71% of her losses. She last fought and got a win over Ryan Dos Santos. Before that, she had a loss to Melissa Martinez. Before that, a loss to Shauna Bannon, which has not aged well whatsoever. Before that, a win over Dila Suyapa. Okay. Now, Montserrat Ruiz, on the other hand, 32 years old, 5 foot tall, 5 feet tall, feet, whatever. 61-inch reach, 10-4 in her professional career, 1-3 in the UFC. She has 2 wins by way of KO at 20%, 3 wins by way of submission at 30%, and 5 wins by way of decision at 50%, giving her a 50% finish rate overall. Ruiz has lost 3 times by way of KO, so that gives her a 75% KO rate, and then KO loss rate, that is, and 1 loss by way of decision, a 25% decision loss rate. Now, her last 4 fights, not looking too hot here. A loss to Eduarda Mora, a loss to Ketlen Amarin, a loss to Amanda Lemos, and before that, she got a win over Cheyenne Velismus, who's really Cheyenne Delidze these days. If you know, you know. Ooh. And guys, Ruiz has not fought since 2023, so it's been quite some time since she's been in the octagon. Now, strengths, weaknesses, keys to victory. Ardelean's got well-rounded striking, crisp combinations, good fundamental kickboxing and range control, decent in the clinch game as well. So when she gets into the clinch game, she's good at having the ability to close that distance effectively and then landing those short strikes, especially in the clinch. So she can make it a dirty fight if she needs to. She also has a strong, aggressive pace, pushes forward, forces her opponents to fight on the back foot, and she has improved her takedown defense and scrambling ability, which we've seen in some of her recent fights. Now, weaknesses for Ardelean, susceptible to some of those power shots, when she is pressured. Not the best at fighting on the back foot as she is on the front foot, okay? Her ground game is pretty underdeveloped as well. And I think she can also overcommit on exchanges that will leave her open to either counters or defensive wrestling, right? So her keys to victory in this matchup, use the jab, use her low kicks so she can manage the distance, but also frustrate some of those entries that Ruiz is going to try to come in with. And I think if she can batter the leg, either the lead leg or probably, she's going to target the lead leg. If she can batter that lead leg of Ruiz and limit her ability to move forward or even plant hard for either counter shots or potential takedown attempts, she will put herself in a really good spot. She doesn't want to be overzealous with these kicks, though, because, guys, as we know, when you are throwing especially a naked leg kick, open for counters, open for takedowns. So she's got to be very mindful of that. I think she needs to have that, intelligent pressure, okay? She can't just be pressuring the pressure. She has to kind of mix levels, throw some to the body, I think, avoid wild exchanges that would invite either a big counter from Ruiz or potentially a takedown attempt. Finally, she has to, if she is taken down, make sure she's working those active frames, whether it be, if she's against the cage and Ruiz gets a leg and is, kind of bringing it down to the ground, she has to frame her opponent, use those frames so she can get back to her feet and have rapid scrambles. I don't think if she stays on the ground, this is going to be a good night for her. So she has to stay on her feet by all means. And if taken down to the ground, she's got to get right back up. All right, guys. Montserrat Ruiz, strengths, weaknesses, keys to victory. Strengths for Ruiz, got a lot of tattoos, right? It's just tough. Just kidding. Very strong wrestling from Ruiz. She's got that high-level cardio and that wrestling grinder pace. Very excellent at wearing out her opponents over, the course of the fight, whether it be, 3 or 5 rounds. I don't think she's gone 5 rounds in UFC. Don't know if she went 5 rounds previous, but she does have good submission awareness as well. And she is pretty tough and has shown some durability in the cage, okay? Now, weaknesses for her, a huge weakness for me that I'm going to call out off the rip here is that she hasn't fought in a couple years now. So that is going to put her a step behind because her opponent fought just a few months ago in May, actually the very end of May, May 31st. I also think that Ruiz can be very predictable with her takedown entries. Doesn't really hide them that well and almost telegraphs them in some cases. And then I would say on the feet, not a very tough customer, really. Like she can definitely be very open to clean counter shots, especially when she's rushing in for takedowns. Her keys to victory in this matchup, guys, closing that distance aggressively and using that clinch and takedowns that she can get to just gain control. And I think if she's able to get Ardelean to the ground, it's not going to be a good night for Ardelean. I think that if Ruiz continuously is pressuring, forcing Ardelean into that defensive position, forcing Ardelean off the front foot and on the back foot is going to make it a much better fight for Ruiz because, as I said, Arda's better fighting on the front foot, pushing her opponents back against the cage versus having her own back against the cage. And I would say that Ruiz does a good job or needs to do a good job in mixing those takedown setups or attempts with strikes. She cannot just be telegraphing takedown attempts because it's not going to go well for her. Guys, all things considered, I think that Ruiz has a lot of ways to win this fight. I'm going to go with Alice Ardelean. I think that her having the more recent experience in the cage, her improving on some of those areas like her takedown defense and scrambles, I think that Ardelean is going to be able to shuck off those takedowns and sting Ruiz with some shots, especially given that she's got a bit of an advantage when it comes to the reach department and the height department. I think that Alice Ardelean is just going to have that physicality advantage potentially over Ruiz. Ruiz is definitely a smaller girl, especially for this weight class, which is kind of odd because this is as small as you can get in UFC. I'm going Alice Ardelean to get a decision win, guys. That is my pick on this one. Fight number 4, we got Ketlen Vieira versus Norma Dumont, if you know what I'm saying, right? Ketlen Vieira is 34 years old, 5'8" with a 68-inch reach, 15-4 in her professional career, 9-4 in the UFC. She has 2 wins by way of knockout, 13% KO rate, 4 wins by way of submission, a 27% submission rate, 9 wins by way of decision, 60% decision rate. Overall, Ketlen Vieira has a 40% finishing rate. So not very high finishing ability here. When we look at her losses, she has 1 loss by way of KO at 25%, 3 losses by way of decision at 75%. Her last 4 fights were a win over Macy Chiasson, where Vieira didn't even try to make weight, as we know. A loss to Kayla Harrison before that, where nothing really happened. I think the only thing I can remember is Kayla holding her down, Ketlen Vieira landing a huge elbow on her face and being held down. Before they went over Penny Kinzad and a loss to Rocky Pennington before that. So loss win for Ketlen Vieira. Norma Bakery Dumont, 35 years old, 5'7", 67-inch reach, 12-2 in her professional career, and 8-2 in her UFC tenure. She has somehow, this is nuts, 0 wins by way of KO. I cannot even fathom that, considering what she did to Irene Aldana. She has 2 wins by way of submission at 17%, 10 wins by decision, and 83% decision rate, giving her only a 17% finishing rate, which is even crazier how much smaller that is than that of Ketlen Vieira. Taking a look at the losses for Norma Dumont, she has 1 loss by way of KO at 50% and 1 loss by way of decision at 50% as well. Her last 4 fights, a huge win on the spear card, if I'm not mistaken, against Irene Aldana, where she pieced Irene Aldana the fuck up, split her eye open. Brutal work from her on that one. Now, that one still went to decision somehow because the doctors, I guess, wanted Irene Aldana to potentially lose her fucking eyesight. Before that, a win over Germaine Durandamine, which is a really good win because she was a very tall, rangy kickboxer for this weight class. Before that, she had one of the best moments in recent UFC history. She gave us Chelsea Get Out Chandler, had her running across the fucking cage, which is one of the best moments I've seen. And also before that, they had the whole like little backstage thing that was hilarious. And then before that, I went over Carol Rosa. So taking a look at strengths, weaknesses, I think that obviously Ketlen Vieira has got that. She's definitely a very physical specimen for this weight class, a very high level judo and grappling. She has those explosive throws, clinch control, strong top pressure and short range as well. I would say she's also can be somewhat powerful and accurate when she's striking in the pocket. She's effective elbows and uppercuts. As I mentioned, she elbowed Kayla Harrison. Excellent cage control and an ability to cut off her opponents. And then I would say she's also very durable and a disciplined fighter with some decent fight IQ, okay? Weaknesses for Ketlen Vieira, she's not a volume striker by any means. She can easily be outpaced by high output opponents. Norma Dumont. Limited lateral movement and also can be very predictable in her takedown entries. I also think that she is susceptible to long-range kicks and rangy angles if she's kept on the outside. It's hard to say if that's going to be the key to victory for Norma Dumont. We're going to get to that. Now, keys to victory for Ketlen Vieira. She needs to close the distance early. She needs to try to get Norma Dumont to the ground where she may be a bit more uncomfortable. I think she also needs to use the cage to limit the movement of Dumont and prevent that long-range striking. I also think she needs to maintain pressure without overextending. If she is leaving herself open on the feet or she overextends and leaves herself open to a counter, she could be hurt by Dumont, knowing that Dumont has some powerful hands, although she hasn't knocked someone out. We've seen the damage she was able to do in some of her fights. I think she needs to mix the low-level changes as well intelligently, not just doing it to do it, but finding different ways to mix in the strikes with those takedowns so that way it's not a telegraphed setup from Ketlen Vieira. Now, Norma Dumont, on the other hand, guys, very, some of her strengths, some people would talk about things that are outside of fighting. I'm not going to do that. Norma Dumont has very long, rangy striking variety, right? She's got those long-range kicks, straight punches, effective use of distance. I would say heavy power, particularly those knees, overhand shots that she can throw. She's also got that very crispy jab that we saw her landing the entire time on Irene Aldana. Irene Aldana is a good boxer too, so it was kind of surprising to see how Norma Dumont was able to just piece her up. I would say Norma Dumont also has some athleticism and explosive entries that you aren't seeing in other girls, especially in this weight class. She can change levels very quickly for takedown attempts. Also has some decent clinch work, and her top game is growing as well. So I don't think she's a fish out of water should this hit the floor. Weaknesses for Norma Dumont. Her takedown defense, I think, can be exploited by an elite grappler in Vieira. Her cardio, I think, can dip in the later rounds under that sustained pressure and grappling. I also think that sometimes Norma Dumont can be a bit flat-footed, especially if the opponent is closing distance aggressively or as the fight goes on and the gas tank depletes a bit. Keys to victory for Norma Dumont. Use that. Although she does not have the reach advantage here, she's not at a huge disadvantage. So I think if she can just keep that range, it's only a 1-inch reach difference. And I think that Norma Dumont is such a better striker that if she can still just keep Vieira at bay with those leg kicks, not only attacking the legs, but using her kicks to the body, maybe throw some shit upstairs as well. I think that doing that along with leading with the jab and straight punches is going to pay dividends for Norma Dumont, because I think she can catch Ketlen Vieira on the end of those punches or kicks as she's trying to move in advance. She needs to mix strikes with potentially sudden level changes. I don't want her to do too much there, because I do think that Vieira is, especially if they get into a very close proximity, Vieira has that judo background where she can kind of get those takedowns or throws that are a bit more unorthodox that Norma Dumont might not be prepared for. I also think that Norma Dumont has to do a good job at countering the clinch attempts that Vieira is probably going to try and wrap up, right? Because given that judo background, we've seen like RDR, Kayla Harrison, they're definitely going to want to get things into that clinch so that they can set things up for potential takedowns. And if Norma Dumont can counter those clinch attempts while circling out using knees and uppercuts when Vieira enters or tries, that'll keep her at bay. And I think that as long as Norma Dumont's staying active in those areas, staying active in transitions, avoiding getting pinned up against the cage, this is Norma Dumont's fight to win. And guys, although she's been out for a bit, I think Norma Dumont's a much better fighter, and I am going to pick Norma Dumont to get it done on Saturday. So that is my pick. I think Norma Dumont gets it done by way of decision. I don't think she's going to finish Ketlen Vieira. Hoping that's correct, but we'll see what happens on the night up. All right, guys, fight number 5 on the card. We've got Donte Johnson versus Boomgang Cedriqes Dumas. Donte Johnson, 26 years old, 5'8", with a 74-inch reach, 6-0 as a pro, 0-0 in the UFC, and very, very simple to go through Donte Johnson's wins and losses. The guy's got no losses on his professional career. All 6 of his wins by way of brutal knockout. Dude's got dynamite in his fucking hands, okay? Now, his last 4 fights, he had a win over Downton Abbey, or otherwise known as Ariane Abbey. That was on Dana White's Contender Series in the heavyweight division. One of the biggest moments that I had this year where Darian Abbey was listed at 6'6", and I think when he fought Donte Johnson, it ended up being updated to 6'2". Like, guys, look, and I've said this before. I try not to, my personal friends say that this is like my personality trait because I don't have a personality. I'm 6'4", okay? And I'm not lying. I'm actually 6'4". It's one of the only great things that has happened to me in my physical life, if you will. Like, other great things that happen. I'm saying like in my characteristics, okay? I'm not going out there saying I'm 6'8", okay? Just like if you're over 6 feet, just say what you are, right? Maybe I might be 6'5" when I wear my Jordans, my Timberlands, but I'm not going to say I'm 6'5", okay? So I don't know why that height difference happened down in Abbey. Regardless, Donte Johnson, the short king that he is, 5'8", he's got all these KOs. He had a win over James Ford, Ryan Parker, Jordan Susfer. I don't know who those folks are, but Donte knocked all of them out. That's the one thing that they all share. Now, Boomgang Cedriqes Dumas, 30 years old, 6'2", 79-inch reach, a 10-3 professional record, 3-3 in the UFC, 4 wins by way of KO at 40%. 2 wins by way of submission at 20%, and then 4 wins by way of decision at 40% as well. A 60% finish rate overall for Sedriques Dumas. Now, Dumas has 2 losses by way of KO at 67% KO rate, KO loss rate, and then a 1 loss by way of submission, a 33% submission loss rate. He's never lost by way of decision. His last 4 fights, guys, most notably, we knew, he went in his last fight, only had $13 in his bank account. Hopefully things have rebounded a bit. He did have a no contest, got kicked in the balls, which is horrible. Hopefully all is well there. Before that, a bad loss to Mikel Olasheshik. Mikel Olasheshik is no joke on the feet, but it was a weird one, guys, from Dumas. Before that, a win over Dennis Tuluan, and before that, a loss to Nersaltan Ruzaboyev, okay? So taking a look at both these gentlemen, their strengths, weaknesses, keys to victory. So Donte Johnson, guys, this dude is a fucking powerhouse. Like, to see him go in there at heavyweight with a huge weight disadvantage and starch out his opponent as quickly as he did, very fast, very powerful. Now, I will admit though, watching that fight could be a bit jaded because that's heavyweight. Whereas, dropping that down to middleweight now, could Donte Johnson kind of fall victim to not having that speed advantage there or the lighter man skill? Now, he's a versatile striker. He's got the crisp boxing combination, solid timing, great use of angles. We saw that in his Contender Series matchup. I would also say he's got a well-rounded skill set, a competent takedown defense, some scrambling ability. This is shown in a couple of his fights. If you go back and watch those, I was very well versed on Donte Johnson because I watched a lot of his stuff that I could find online for Contender Series, actually. I would say he's got a solid fight IQ and pace management too. He picks moments when to press or reset effectively, I think. And then he's also pretty durable and composed under that pressure. We saw that on Contender Series as well. Weakness is that he is not necessarily going out there and getting like one punch KO shots, right? Like he's not Ilya Topuria-ing, that's really hard to say, people, but he still has KO power in the hands because we've seen him only get wins by way of KO. I think that he can also be cautious, miss some of those opportunities if he's overly conservative in the fight. It's going to be interesting to see how he approaches a middleweight bout when he just fought at heavyweight. And I think as the fight goes on, it's likely that he could be a bit more predictable in some of these feints or combinations he's putting together, because I think at times you'll see him kind of repeat the same movements and combinations in his fights. Now, keys to victory for Donte: use that technical striking and footwork, control the distance, get inside the distance too, because Dumas is going to have a significant reach advantage. So Donte Johnson's going to have to kind of find his way in. Guys, that's not a huge issue here. As I mentioned, his last matchup, he fought a guy that was like 6'2.5", the guy that was, supposed to be 6'6". I think also he needs to mix feints with those level changes, keep Dumas guessing, and then timing counters well, right? If he can have Dumas maybe overextend on a strike, he might be able to catch him with something heavy that puts him out. And one other thing is that Dumas does have a bit of a wrestling game. I think Donte Johnson's got to be about his wits, make sure he's defending those takedowns and punishing those failed entries with knees or strong uppercuts up the middle, and then maintain a steady pace, avoid brawling with Dumas. I don't think Dumas is going to get in a brawl with this guy, because if he does, I think that it's going to go the opposite way he's hoping. That's my opinion. But when we look at Cedriqes Dumas, his strengths, weaknesses, keys to victory, obviously Dumas has had kind of a rough go at it in the UFC. Obviously, if we're talking personal shit too, there's some shit going on there. The strengths that Dumas has, guys, he is physically gifted, that he's 6'2", right? And a 79-inch reach. That's awesome. Like, that's a really good thing to have here. Now, guys, reach can be a bit deceiving though, because the way I understand how you actually measure reach, it goes from like the tip of your middle finger to your other middle finger with the arm stretched out, right? And technically speaking, you're not supposed to have your fucking fingers out like this unless you're John Jones or Cyril Gahn. So really your reach can be negligible, especially if you just have long ass fingers, which, if you don't know this, John Jones has very long fucking hands, like long fingers. Okay. That adds to his like 7-foot reach, but he always fights, jabbing people in the eyes. So it is a benefit for John. Okay. I'm getting off on a tangent. I think that Dumas has a long reach. He can be an aggressive striker, decent straight punches, I would say. I think that his straight punches are his bread and butter here. I also think that Dumas has enough ability in the grappling to mix it up and potentially get control of his opponents. We've seen this in a couple of his fights. Obviously, the win over Dennis Tululin's kind of like that. I think now when we look at the weaknesses though of Dumas, he has that tendency to gas out. He also has a tendency to just like be weary of the fight, like not really in it, not looking to win the fight by way of like devastating fashion. I think he is totally fine if things kind of go into like a lollygagging place, if you want my honest opinion. I also think that his actual like submission defense is not like, I don't know that he has the best ground skills. Okay. Like when we look at things like that, also not always going for that submission offense. I feel like he might get it to the ground, but not do much with it. I think that keys of victory for Dumas would be just staying at range, pumping the jab, pumping out some leg kicks, maybe some body kicks, using the straight punches on Donte Johnson, maybe mixing in some clinch work, because he will have that significant height advantage where he might be able to land some solid knees up the middle in the clinch. And I think he needs to be just very wary of any wild entries or overextending on his punches, because should he be caught up while overextending, Donte Johnson has the chance to put him down, put his lights out. Guys, this one, I'm sorry, but although Sedriques Dumas has had a lot more professional experience, especially in the UFC, I got to go Donte Johnson. The fact that Donte Johnson was able to put out a heavyweight the way he did in the Contender Series, the way that he's been able to finish fights prior to that. Also, he's got that, light, heavier man skill coming down to this weight class. Younger guy as well. I just think that Donte Johnson's going to find a way to finish this fight, especially given that Dumas, against Mikel Olasheshik, did not look good on the feet, got clipped and was dropped and put out pretty quickly. So I have a feeling that Donte Johnson is liable to do the same thing to Cedriqes Dumas. I see him finishing this fight in round 1. That's my opinion. All right, guys. Fight number 6, we got Timmy Kwamba versus Chang Ho Lee. So Timmy Kwamba is 26 years old, 5'9", with a 71-inch reach, 9-3 in his professional career, 1-2 in the UFC. He has 5 wins by way of KO, a 56% KO rate, 0 wins by way of submission, and 4 wins by way of decision, 56% decision rate, giving him, 44% decision rate, a 56% finishing rate for Timmy Kwamba. Now, looking at Timmy's losses, okay? Timmy has lost by way of submission only 1 time at 33%, and then lost by decision 2 times by way, or 67%. And he's lost by decision 2 times, a 67% decision loss rate. His last 4 fights, he got the win over Roberto Romero. Prior to that, a loss to Lucas Almeida. Before that, a split decision loss to Blagioki, which is a close fight. And before that, a win over Michael Stack. Chang Ho Lee, 31 years old, 5'8", 69-inch reach. So he's just 1 inch shorter and 2 inches. He has a 2-inch reach disadvantage compared to Timmy. He is 11-1 in his professional career, 2-0 in the UFC. He has 5 wins by way of KO at 45%, 2 wins by submission at 18%, and 4 wins by way of decision at 36%, giving him a 64% finishing rate overall. And when we take a look at his losses, Lee has only lost by way of decision once, and that is 100% of his losses. Now, Lee's last 4 fights, he had a win over Cortavius Romius, a win over Long Zhao, a win over Dermisi, and a win over Rana Singh. Taking a look at the strengths, weaknesses, keys of victory for Timmy. Timmy, guys, he actually shocked me in his performance earlier this year, where he was able to get that KO over Roberto Romero. He found a KO, a flying knee. Very durable and experienced MMA vet. He's got toughness and grit. He stays in there. Heavy hands, powerful striking, especially in short range, and he's definitely capable of those explosive finishes. I would also say he has a good job at chucking off takedowns or mounting his own offense or like reversals off of takedowns. So Timmy showed a lot of skills in his last outing, but it was against a guy where you might question like whether or not that guy's super elite, right? Now, weaknesses for Timmy, I think that his pace and cardio definitely wither out as the fight goes on. It just as it does for every fighter, but for him, it's definitely something that I think is a weakness, especially in this type of matchup. I think also he keeps his guard on the feet quite open, which opens him up for, counter shots, opens him up for getting hit by his opponents, especially if he's advancing aggressively. And then also, I think he's just less dynamic with his movement and angles, can be a bit predictable on the feet as well, especially against someone who might be a higher level striker. I think the keys of victory for Timmy Kwamba is closing the distance, smothering Chang Ho Lee's offense with the clinch, the short strikes, working body shots, and using those body shots using the body shots throughout the fight to deplete the movement and gas tank of Lee, who's going to be trying to, move forward and also potentially mix in those takedowns. I think he also needs to cut off the cage, force exchanges where he can get off those short in the pocket strikes that will hurt or wither at Chang Ho Lee over the course of the fight. And I think he just needs to stay composed defensively, avoid leaving his chin on display for that of Chang Ho Lee. When I look at Chang Ho Lee, his strengths, weaknesses, keys to victory. Chang Ho Lee is a very quick technical striker. He's got sharp counters, solid footwork, fantastic cardio and pace, and he keeps his volume high and maintains movement throughout fights, okay? So those are really solid skills to have, especially in this type of matchup. I think that Chang Ho Lee also uses kicks very effectively and is able to manage distance and disrupt the rhythm of his opponents because of that. And then one other thing is that he has disciplined defense and an ability to pick those shots from range, but he also can mix in those takedowns and get his opponent in a precarious position. We saw this against Cortavius Romius. Weaknesses for Chang Ho Lee, I would say one thing is just a lack of experience against those higher level guys. Not that Kwamba has a ton of that himself, but He just doesn't have a ton of experience, obviously, with super high-level guys in the UFC. I also think that Chang Ho Lee, he could struggle if Kwamba's able to stay on the front foot and push Chang Ho Lee backwards. I think Chang Ho Lee could struggle against that relentless forward pressure. So I think he has to, if we're going to jump right into the keys to victory, I think Chang Ho Lee has to do his best to, utilize that rapid and lateral movement that he does very well, staying mobile, circling off the cage, avoid being trapped in close encounters with Kwamba. Also, trying to avoid the clinch striking of Kwamba. I think he also needs to get the respect of Kwamba early and often with, counter strikes if he can catch him, or just being, instead of, landing counter strikes, being more offensively sound, landing and then, getting in and out of range when he needs to. That way he can keep Kwamba at bay and not want to stay heavy on that front foot pressure. Okay. Now, I also think that Chang Ho Lee can mix in those takedown attempts and potential ground control against Kwamba, especially if he's able to set it up with some powerful and quick striking. Guys, when I look at this matchup, I think Kwamba is a very durable prospect and has all of the skills to potentially, have a big upset here. I think that Chang Ho Lee, though, is just very skilled. And if he is mixing things in the way I said, like mixing in the quick, fast striking, the kicks at range, but also mixing in the takedowns, that he is likely to get a win by way of decision in this matchup. That is the way I see this one going anyways, because Kwamba is not the easiest guy to finish. So I'm thinking that if this ends, it probably ends by way of decision, and Chang Ho Lee gets his hand raised. Fight number 7, guys. We got Billy Elekana. His last name reminds me of the Meli Kaliki Mac Hawaiian fucking Christmas song. Versus Kevin Christian. 2 first names for Kevin Christian. Billy Elekana is 30 years old, 6'3", with a 77-inch reach, 8-2 in his professional career, 1-1 in the UFC thus far. He has 3 wins by way of KO, a 38% KO rate, 1 win by way of submission, a 13% submission rate, 4 wins by way of decision, a 50% decision rate, giving him a 50% finishing rate overall. When we look at his losses, Billy Elekana's only lost 1 time by way of sub and 1 time by way of decision, giving him a 50% loss rate in the submission and decision categories. His last 4 fights, he's gotten a couple of these ones under the UFC. A win over Ibo Aslan in a pretty lackluster performance, but I'm just happy to say that I picked Billy Elekana to get it done, and he did. Before that, he lost to Bogdan Guskov, a very good showing for him, but ultimately he got choked out. Before that, wins over Jirial Simmons, and he went over Chuck Campbell. Kevin Christian, okay, this guy won in September of 2024, was his last fight against Francesco Mazzeo. He won on Dana White's Contender Series. Now, Kevin Kievers is 30 years old, 6'7", with an 80-inch reach, 9-2 as a professional, 0-0 in the UFC, 4 wins by way of KO at 44%, 5 wins by way of submission at 56%, and 0 wins by decision, giving him a 100% finish rate, which is exciting. Now, his losses, similar to him having 2 first names, he has 2 losses, 1 by way of KO and 1 by way of submission, 50% in both categories. Last 4 fights for him, as I mentioned, he won against Francesco Mazzeo, a win over Miguel Porto, he went over Alvaro Tabosa, and a win over Daniel Trinidad. Strengths, weaknesses, keys to victory for my boy, Billy Boy Elekana. Billy Boy, he's got some powerful and aggressive striking. I think he does fight in a southpaw stance, or he maybe even switch stance, if I'm not mistaken. He's definitely an aggressive striker, has heavy overhands and hooks. He's also got that Hawaiian chin, guys. Like, this dude, it can eat shots from hard punchers, especially like Bogdan Guskov and also Ibo Aslan. Definitely, I think, very good at finding his way into a fight too. Like, even against Bogdan Guskov, it was not just a cakewalk for Bogdan. Like, Billy Elekana had success, was able to mix in the takedowns. I think he also has some very good clinch power and an ability to get the better of his opponents when he's in those clinch situations. Some weaknesses is just sometimes he has a bit of that limited variety on the feet. He's not able to mix in a ton of like out there type of strikes where, it would surprise his opponent really. I think that his takedown defense can also be a bit inconsistent. And then we also saw him, in his fight against Bogdan Guskov, he got finished in the 2nd round. His cardio definitely fell off pretty quickly there, but giving him the benefit of the doubt, that was a short notice fight. Ilya Elekana in this matchup, guys, he's going to need to close the distance quickly and just impose that forward pressure because his opponent's going to have a bit of a size advantage here. I think he needs to use those feints as well to mask some power shots, prevent counters, stay heavy in the clinch. I mean, I just think if he does get into grappling situations, he needs to be very weary of that, given that his opponent has a very high submission ability, submission rate. So you don't want to be caught up in something on the ground, especially if his opponent, is able to pull guard and get him wrapped up in something. Kevin Christian, on the other hand, his strengths, weaknesses, keys of victory. He has, some very technical boxing fundamentals, crispy jabs, straight punches, and counters. Obviously, being 6'7" and having a long reach, those things are going to play in his favor here. Very good footwork, and he has good movement to try and control distance and tempo in the fight. I think he's pretty composed fighter with solid cardio over 3 rounds. And I think he also has that ability, because of his height and size, to pick opponents apart with volume at range. Not much of a power striker, if you will. Weaknesses, first weakness I'd call out is he does lack the one-punch stopping power compared to someone like Elekana, who could potentially land a heavy shot and hurt or finish him. I think he can also be kind of pressured into a defensive posture when he's against the cage. We've seen this if you look at some of his fights. He gets pressured against the cage and kind of almost doesn't know what to do, gets his back up against the cage and becomes almost defensive in nature and not really looking to offer up any offense. Now, I think Kevin Christian, although he has a 100% finish rate, I think that in fights, he's kind of always had a willing customer to push him to or engage in the fight with him, where he's able to find those finishes. I don't know if he'll be able to finish the fight if he is not able to get the opponent to engage. And I think Billy Elekana does a great job at sticking to his game plan, not playing into the role of his opponent. And so that's going to be a weakness, I think, for Kevin Christian here. I think keys of victory for Christian is maintaining the range with his jab and leg kicks. Obviously, he's going to be a bit taller here, have a reach advantage. I think he also needs to force clinch escapes on his terms of when Billy Elekana is maybe trying to push him against the fence and get the clinch exchanges going. He needs to force his way out of there and avoid getting pinned against the fence. And I think he needs to not be worried about that 100% finish rate. He just needs to be worried about winning the fight. If he goes in there and he's worried about the finishing rate and losing that could play into Elekana's favor, in my opinion. Guys, just because Kevin Christian hasn't fought in a long time, although he's got a size advantage, I like Billy Elekana in this fight because the reach advantage is not the worst in the world. It's a 3-inch advantage for Kevin Christian, which is not crazy. And I think Billy Elekana he's been in there with other tough outings against Bogdan Guskov and Ivo Aslan. I think Billy Elekana gets this one done, guys. I think he gets it done by way of decision because Kevin Christian's not really much of a guy. He's only lost by way of finish, but definitely hasn't lost in a while. So I think that Billy Elekana is likely to get a decision here, just being the more active guy, especially given that Kevin Christian hasn't fought in a year. Fight number 8, we got Allan Nascimento versus Cody Durden. Allan Nascimento is 34 years old, 5'8" with a 69.5-inch reach, 21-6 in his professional career, 3-1 in the UFC. He has 1 win by way of KO, only 5% KO rate, 15 wins by way of submission, a 71% submission rate, and 5 wins by way of decision, a 24% decision rate, giving him a 76% finishing rate overall. Nascimento has never been KO'd, never been submitted, only lost by way of decision, giving him a 100% decision loss rate. His last 4 fights, 3 wins over Rafael Filo, Carlos Hernandez, and Jake Hadley, and a split decision loss to Tagir Ulanbekov. Dude, Ulanbekov just has how many split decision wins does this fucker have? Anywho, Cody Durden, Georgia's finest, 34 years old, 5'7", 67-inch reach, a 17-8 professional record, 6-6 in the UFC, 6 wins by way of KO at 35%, 6 wins by way of submission at 35%, and 5 wins by way of decision at 29%, giving Cody Durden a 71% finishing rate overall. Cody Durden has a few losses on his record, 2 by way of KO, 25% overall, 4 losses by way of submission, a 50% submission loss rate, and 2 losses by way of decision, a 25% decision loss rate. In his last 4 fights, not as lucky as that of his opponent. A loss to Jose Ochoa, who is a young whippersnapper in this division, heavy hitter as well. A loss to Joshua Van, another young whippersnapper in this division. Before that, a win over Matt Schnell, formerly retired and now back Matt Schnell, and a loss to Bruno Silva. So Cody Durden's definitely been in there with some of the cream of the crop, if you will, in the rankings of flyweight. Taking a look at their strengths, weaknesses, Allan Nascimento is going to have that powerful, aggressive, striking, some heavy leg kicks, strong boxing, but he is also a bit of an ace on the ground when it comes to submissions. If he is able to get things down to the ground, he is likely to find a way to submit his opponent, especially training how to shoot the box with Diego Lima and Charles Oliveira. Now, weaknesses for Allan Nascimento can be a bit predictable, especially when he's pressuring, tends to load up on the power shots. His cardio can also seem to dip as things get into a higher volume or long range striking war. And also, although Nascimento has solid grappling on the ground, I think that sometimes his ability or offensive grappling is not the best. So like his ability to get his opponents down is not always the best, but I think his keys to victory here are going to be using leg kicks, close the distance smartly, does not want to rush things on the feet because Durden is very durable. And Durden also, I think, has that wrestling ability himself. I think that he's going to need to defend takedowns, but also use his submission game to either thwart some of the takedown offense of Cody Durden or simply just use those submission attempts to try to finish the fight. Cody Durden, very elite wrestling base, relentless takedown pressure, top control, and scrambles. He has very good cardio and pace as well, grinds his opponents out over the course of the fight. He's definitely improved in his striking and has some solid, functional setups to open those levels. Biggest thing, though, he has very strong positional control and ability to score once he gets top pressure on the ground. Weaknesses, Durden's not really like a KO artist by any means. Very vulnerable to leg kicks and also counter shots when he's trying to close the distance. But then also, I think Cody Durden is definitely a guy who can be submitted on the ground, especially when you're considering the skill level that Allan Nascimento is going to bring to the cage from a BJJ perspective. The keys of victory for Cody Durden: drag Nascimento into these wild and long grappling exchanges. He's going to want to shoot early, chain the takedowns, get top control, stay away from the submission game of Allan Nascimento. So he has to be about his P's and Q's while in top control. Then he needs to also be able to mix in some ground and pound and potential submission attempts. But he doesn't want to play that game too much because Nascimento is going to be the better grappler here when it comes to the BJJ. So what I would say, guys, in this matchup, I think Cody Durden has every chance to potentially just outwill Allan Nascimento. I just think that Nascimento, having the tutelage of Charles Oliveira and Diego Lima, having that skill set and those folks that are in his corner, also just being a better Brazilian jiu-jitsu artist, I think that Allan Nascimento is likely to actually get a submission here against Cody Durden because Cody Durden, in my opinion, has seemed to fall victim to those quite a bit. And I think Nascimento could be on his way to getting another submission win this Saturday. All right, guys, fight number 9 on this card. We've got Charles Chuck Buffalo Radtke, one of my favorites, guys. I fucking love Chuck Buffalo. 35 years old, 5'9", 72-inch reach, a 10-5 professional record, 3-2 in the UFC. Chuck Buffalo's got some dynamite hands, 5 wins by way of KO at 50%, 2 wins by way of submission at 20%, 3 wins by way of decision at 30%, giving Chuck Buffalo a finishing rate of 70% overall. Chuck Buffalo has 3 losses by KO at 60% and 2 losses by way of decision at 40%. He's never been submitted. His last 4 fights, he had a bad KO loss to Mike Malott. That one was tough to watch. Before that, a win over Matt Semmelsberger, which does not happen. Like, Matt Semmelsberger is the guy that usually knocks people out, not when Chuck Buffalo met him, okay? Before that, a loss to Carlos Preptes, and before that, a brutal Looney Tune KO over Gilbert Urbina. Daniel Frunza, on the other hand, this is the guy who got his lip popped off by Rhys McKee. Daniel Frunza is 31 years old, 6'1", 73-inch reach, a 9-3 professional record, 0-1 in the UFC. 8 wins by way of KO, a 89% KO rate. Very, very solid there. 0 wins by way of submission, so we'll jump to decisions. He has 1 win by way of decision at 11%, giving him an 89% finishing rate, all by way of KO. Very solid from Daniel Frunza. Now, Frunza has 1 loss by way of KO at 33%, and that was his last matchup. I think he got dropped early on, and his lip was busted the fuck up. Before that, he had 2 losses by way of submission at 67%. When we look at his last 4 fights, that loss to Rhys McKee, and then several wins before over guys that I am not sure, I don't really know who they are. Guys, Chuck Buffalo notably trains with Bilal Muhammad. So not only is Chuck Buffalo going to have the heavy aggressive striking and in his power within his hooks and overhands, he has a beautiful left hook. That's what we saw him basically kill Gilbert Urbina with. Good forward pressure and that ability to finish openings quickly. I would say he's got a durable chin, gritty mentality, and he's comfortable in firefights, but sometimes he gets overzealous there, right? We saw Mike Malott starch him out in that close range boxing. So I think he has to be careful. I also think, though, from a strength perspective, very good and effective inside that with that close, dirty boxing and short range damage that he's able to put on his opponents. I think that also having the likes of Bilal Muhammad in his training camps and corner will give him opportunities or the ability to latch up clinch, latch up some of those wrestling exchanges if he needs them, and ultimately stay safe in those areas where Daniel Frunza may be able to hurt him, given that Daniel Frunza's no slouch on the feet himself. Weaknesses for Chuck Buffalo can be a bit one-dimensional on the feet with his combinations. I think he has to mix those combinations up well, especially against Daniel Frunza, who's got power in his hands himself. Definitely can be lapsing when it comes to defense, right? Like sometimes when he's pressuring or trying to land his own offense, leaves himself wide open to be countered or potentially taken down. Not really a worry for a takedown here against Frunza, but potential to be countered and maybe KO'd. And I think also his cardio could potentially suffer as well if he's unable to finish the fight early. But I think Chuck Buffalo, guys, we've seen him in there against, Blood Diamond. He was able to win kind of just with the clinch exchanges and things of that nature. I think if he can close the distance, land those hard hooks on Frunza, maybe even try to bust up the lip of Frunza, knowing that Frunza just received a lot of damage not that long ago this year. I think he also needs to mix some body shots in with those head attacks. He can't just be always going to the head. He's got to mix the body shots in and get those hands to drop that will open up those fight-ending sequences that Chuck Buffalo is keen on getting. And I think if he could also use some feints, right, to mask some power shots and maybe avoid those predictable entries that Daniel Frunza is going to be trying to time. I think overall, he needs to also just keep in mind that, Frunza may shoot for takedowns, stay about his wits when it comes to maintaining balance and scrambling effectively. Now, Daniel Frunza has not had a lot of opportunities, guys, yet in the UFC to prove himself. His first fight going out there against Rhys McKee, I think he said some crazy shit beforehand and he got pieced the fuck up. I think that he does have some good cardio and pace, but based on what I saw in that first fight, guys, he does not look like he might have that great ability at withstanding damage from his opponents just based on how Ricky was able to not only hurt him, but I think he dropped him immediately from a jab. Really fucked him up bad. So I think that his strengths are, he obviously is a technical striker, has that ability to knock his opponents out. I think his weakness is slow to capitalize on openings. I think also when we consider the fact that Rhys McKee battered him and hurt him badly, it doesn't seem like he does that well when he's, hurt and pushed against the cage from being hurt by his opponent. It seemed like he kind of just lost all his wits after that happened in his last fight. I think his keys to victory here is trying to keep the fight at range, trying to utilize his small height advantage. It doesn't have much of a reach advantage, but he can kind of stay at range and land shots at range, keeping Chuck Buffalo at bay and staying out of those firefights with Chuck Buffalo in close, that Frunza could potentially win a decision, or if he can time a sharp and hard counter, maybe hurting Chuck Buffalo, which is definitely an opportunity for Daniel Frunza here as well. But guys, I have to go with Chuck Buffalo here. I watching Daniel Frunza in the UFC so far, I don't have much to go off of. And although Chuck Buffalo is going to have that height disadvantage, the reach disadvantage is negligible at 1 inch. And Chuck Buffalo has a very solid approach and game plan in his fights where he's able to close distance on his opponents and land, right? He landed on all of his opponents so far. And I think that if he's able to land flush on Frunza, he could potentially put him out. So I am going to pick Chuck Buffalo to get it done by way of KO. I think that is the way this fight will end up going. Probably, I would say, a round 2 KO in this one. And that is going to be my decision or pick, if you will. Fight number 10, we got Isaac Dulgarian versus Yadier Del Valle. So Isaac Dulgarian is 29 years old, 5'7", 71-inch reach, a 7-1 professional record, 2-1 in the UFC, 4 wins by KO at 57% KO rate, 3 wins by way of submission at 43% submission rate, 0 wins by decision, given my boy Isaac 100% finishing rate overall. He has one loss in his career, and that was by way of decision. And looking at his last 4 fights, a decent strength of schedule. A win over Brennan Marat, a loss to C-Rod by decision. C-Rod's like the dark horse, guys, as we know. A win over Francis Marshall, who I think is pretty decent, actually. And they win over TJ Britton, okay? Looking at Yadier Del Valle, 29 years old, 5'9", 69-inch reach, a 9-0 professional record, 1-0 in the UFC. 2 wins by way of KO at 22%. 3 wins by submission at 33%. 4 wins by decision at 44%, giving Valle a 56% finishing rate overall. When I look at his last 4 fights, got a win over Connor Matthews, but the other guys are pretty much unknown, at least from my purview, so not much to go on there. And when I look at their strengths and weaknesses, Isaac Dulgarian, obviously, he's an athletic striker, very good hand speed, crispy combinations. His effective use of angles is something to behold. I think he also has strong takedown defense and scramble ability for a textbook striker. Very good cardio and pace as well. Sustains output over 3 rounds. He's very durable and composed under the pressure as well. He's fought guys who can really, push a fight, right? Like Francis Marshall is no joke. Like that type of fighter can kind of mix things up, whether it be takedowns and striking and mixing it in nicely. I think that him having a good win over him really says a lot. Some weaknesses for Dulgarian: doesn't have like that one punch ragdoll KO power. Can be predictable with his entries too. If he's overly reliant on his jab. I think his ground offense is a bit limited if it hits the mat for extended periods, but he does have submission wins on his record, so he's not a fish out of water when it comes to the ground game. I think Dulgarian's keys to victory here, using the jab, he's going to actually have a reach advantage despite being the smaller fighter. I think if he can use the jab, the movement, lateral footwork, control distance, frustrate Valle, land those shots at range, mixing the leg kicks as well to slow the pace of Valle. I think if he can just utilize that range, utilize his reach, counter aggressively when needed as Valle is maybe, pushing forward. And then he just needs to be able to defend any takedowns and scramble quickly in those wrestling or grappling exchanges. Now, Valle has, aggressive forward pressure, good knockout timing in some of the knockouts that I've seen, a strong clinch and dirty boxing skills as well, which is a solid skill to have, especially if you're neutralizing a technical striker. Some of the weaknesses I would call for Valle are cardio can fade if this fight goes long, especially if they're having like a high output, high octane, high output striking battle. I think he also has a tendency to overcommit on strikes, which really leaves him open for those counters or takedowns. Not something to want to do against a guy that's like Dulgarian here. Keys to victory for Valle is closing the distance early. He does have a small reach disadvantage. He's going to want to stay mindful of the counters, set up his entries with feints and level changes, and if he's taken down, scramble actively and get back to the feet. Keep it on the feet and maybe utilize that clinch, right, against a guy in Dulgarian who's a technical striker. Try to get the clinch so he can get off his own strikes and minimize the offense of Dulgarian. I have to go with Dulgarian in this one, guys. I think Dulgarian is just an overall more effective finisher, given the fact that he's got a 100% finish rate, but also more tested in the UFC. I think that he is likely to, we haven't seen, this is a tough one, because you got Dulgarian who's a 100% finisher, Valle who's never been finished. Does Dulgarian get it done? You know what? Fuck it. I'm going to say Dulgarian finishes Valle on Saturday night, giving him his first finish of his career, or finish loss of his career, and keeping Isaac Dulgarian nice and good with that 100% finishing rate. Okay, guys, fight number 11. We got Jeremiah Wells versus Themba Gorimbo. This is a tough one for me, guys, but I'll get to that. Jeremiah Wells, 38 years old, 5'9", 74-inch reach, a 12-4 professional record, 4-2 in the UFC, 5 wins by KO with a 42% KO rate, 4 wins by submission, 33% submission rate, 3 wins by decision, a 25% decision rate. Jeremiah Wells has a 75% finishing rate overall. When we look at his losses, he's lost once by way of submission at 25% and lost 3 times by decision at 75%. Last 4 fights, a loss to Max Griffin, a loss to Carlson Harris. Before that, a win over Matt Semmelsberger and a win over Court McGee. Themba Gorimbo, on the other hand, 34 years old, 6'1". This is the guy that got the house from the rock. 6'1", 77-inch reach, 14-5 professional record, 4-2 in the UFC, 2 wins by way of KO at 14%, 6 wins by way of submission at 43%, 6 wins by way of decision at 43%, giving them a 57% finishing rate overall. Themba has 1 loss by way of KO at 20%, 3 losses by way of submission at 60%, and 1 loss by decision, a 20% decision loss rate. Last 4 fights for Themba had some solid success in the UFC till he ran into Vicente Luque, who choked him out almost immediately. This was in the December 7th, 2024 card. Before that, a decent streak there over Pete Rodriguez. He actually knocked out Pete Rodriguez, which is crazy because Themba is not known for getting KOs. A win over Ramiz Brahim, and a win over Nico Price. Guys, when I look at this one and break it down, honestly, Jeremiah Wells is a very well-rounded fighter. He has well-rounded striking, crisp boxing, and combinations, but also very good takedowns and an ability to get opponents to the ground. We saw him choke out Blood Diamond. Blood Diamond doesn't have a ground game, though. Weaknesses for Jeremiah Wells, not a one-punch KO artist, can be very predictable in pacing, and I think also as fights go on, he gets more tired, and he's 38 years old, guys. That's a big thing that I'm using in this matchup here. 38 years old is not a good sign at this weight class. Keys to victory for Jeremiah Wells, using those boxing combinations and feints, set up the clean entries and punish Gorimbo's aggression, especially if Gorimbo's steady on the takedown offense here, which we know he will be. I think he needs to control clinch exchanges, maybe even utilize sort of his own offensive wrestling if he can, but does not want to stay there very long because he doesn't want to give Themba Gorimbo a chance of, winning in those exchanges and gaining top control. Gorimbo, guys, it's a bit frustrating. Like, Themba has shown us, like, he can have knockout power, but like recently his game has kind of just been like very boring in the cage. I'm just gonna keep it a buck with you guys. He like gets his opponent against the cage, clinches him up, takes him down, doesn't really do much like in his last few showings, right? He does have that physicality and he's very good with his cardio and work rate. I just think that weaknesses for him is he can be hittable. He doesn't usually like to get into a lot of striking exchanges, especially when his opponent is a better striker, which could be the case here against Jeremiah Wells. I think Themba's keys to victory, guys, is being a bit of the younger fighter here, being a bit of the taller fighter as well, a longer reach. He should keep the striking at range so he can, pepper it range against Jeremiah Wells. I think he also needs to mix in the takedown attempts with those strikes and time those takedown attempts when Wells is looking to mount his own offense, because he does not want to get caught in a situation where he's overzealous, shoots a takedown and gets choked out, just like he did against Vicente Luque. I think he needs to be mindful of the counters and that aggression that comes from Jeremiah Wells and just time things nicely so he can set up his own takedowns. I think if Themba gets this into a clinch exchange or on the ground, he's likely to find success. And guys, ultimately, I got to just side with Themba here. I was back and forth because I think Jeremiah Wells has the grappling chops to shuck off the takedowns of Themba, but I do think that Themba will just be nonstop on that, and I think he will likely just win a decision. Could be another, lackluster one, or maybe he surprises us and gets Jeremiah Wells in a submission. We shall see. I'm going to lean on the side of Themba getting it done by way of a boring decision. Fight number 12 on the card, we got Waldo Cortez Acosta versus Ante Delije. Waldo Cortez Acosta, 34 years old, 6'4" with a 78-inch reach. Salsa Boy is 14-2 in the 14-2 as a professional, 7-2 in the UFC, 6 wins by way of KO at 43%, 1 win by way of submission at 7%, 7 wins by way of decision at 50%. He is a new age heavyweight who somehow gets a ton of decisions. Don't know how. Powerful. Acosta has only lost twice in his professional career. Both of those losses came by way of decision, giving him a 100% decision loss rate. Last outing was 50% of that, right? He lost to Sergey Pavlovich by way of decision. Before that, he got a split decision win, I think, over Sergey Spivak, a win over Ryan Spann, and a win over Robelis de Spain. On the side of Ante Delije, 35 years old, 6'3", 78-inch reach, 26 wins and 6 losses in his professional career, 1-0 in the UFC. Ante Delije was previously listed as 6'5", but he's 6'3" now. Don't know what happened there. Ante Delije, though, has 12 wins by way of KO at 46%, 7 wins by submission at 27%, and 7 wins by way of decision at 27% as well, giving him a 73% finishing rate overall. sorry, I skipped over this. Cortez Acosta, 50% finishing rate. Delija and his losses, okay? He's lost 3 by KO, which is half of his losses at 50%. Lost 2 by submission at 33%, and then 1 by decision at 17%. His last 4 fights got a huge statement KO win over Marcin Tybura in his UFC debut, a win over Jorgen De Castro in the PFL, I believe it was. Before that, a loss to Valentin Moldavsky, and then before that, a win over Maurice Green. So in this matchup, guys, I think Waldo Cortez Acosta, his strengths, very powerful, heavy hitting striker with that legitimate KO power, one of the best jabs in the business, and he also has a really good overhand, comes from the Dominican, I believe, has a pitching background. It's why he's able to wind up that overhand so nicely and land very heavy when he needs to. Also decent, good in close, dirty boxing. I think also the biggest thing that I would say is on the side of Cortez is he has one of the best chins I've seen in the heavyweight division, which allows him to stay in there with the likes of like a Sergey Pavlovich and just other heavy hitters that he's faced without, being KO'd, right? Now, weaknesses for him can be very one-dimensional, relies a lot on the jab and overhand, just kind of jab, overhand, spamming kind of those same same strikes on the feet. I mean, I think the cardio definitely fades for him, especially as you get into those later rounds. Keys of victory for Cortez Acosta, I think, doing what he always does with the jab early on, but I think he needs to try to land that hard overhand flush and potentially, hurting or even putting Delija's lights out. Delija's definitely had a lot of professional fights. Delija does have a lot of exposure and training with Tom Aspinall and other very good heavyweights, which likely could play into his favor here. I think that Cortez Acosta just needs to stay on his own game plan, landing the jab and just being a higher output striker than Delija, and just trying to keep Delija at bay from those creative entries he has on the feet. I think if Cortez Acosta can land with some mustard early on, it'll keep Delija on the back foot a bit more, which is likely to bring him to getting a win by way of decision is the way I would see it happening. When we look at Delija, though, guys, like I said, a very well-rounded striker, very good technical boxing and varied attack. He is like the pupil, I believe, of Mirko Krokop because he is also from Croatia. And then, like I said, trains with Tom and Andy Aspinall. So he's going to have a very good, strong wrestling and grappling base, very intelligent fight IQ as well. I love the way he's able to mix the angles of his strikes. The one that he caught Marcin Tybura with was definitely at an odd angle, but just hurt him, dropped him. Now, weaknesses for Andy Delija is a bit older, right? As a heavyweight, not that old though, really. Not anything that you should take away as a core weakness. But he does lack some single shot, like fight-ending knockout power. He's also going up against Cortez Acosta, who's got a chin of steel. I think that another thing is that Ante Delija has been susceptible to power himself, and I think going up against a guy in Cortez Acosta, he can be a bit open on the feet, which will potentially allow Cortez Acosta to land that sharp overhand and also land that jab quite a bit. Now, these guys have the same reach, so it's not like either one is going to want to keep it at range because I think they can both pepper each other. It's about who's going to have better in and out movement. I think the keys to victory for Ante Delija, using the level changes and takedowns to maybe neutralize or tire out Acosta's power, because I think that he may have an advantage there. But Cortez Acosta's big and he's strong. I think Ante Delija needs to just make sure he's staying composed in the feet, staying clean with his shots and his entries, controlling distance too, using the jab himself, and maybe even timing the jab of Cortez Acosta with his own offense would be a very good sound movement or choice for Ante Delija. Ultimately, guys, I think that this one is a bit of a toss-up because Ante Delija showed very high-level striking skills in his first UFC outing. But I just think Cortez Acosta, guys, although I didn't pick him against Pavlovich because Pavlovich has just been in there with way better guys, I think that Cortez Acosta has a way of finding wins and getting wins in these matchups. And I think that this is likely to go to decision. And I see Cortez Acosta getting a win by decision here. And finally, guys, the last fight of the evening, the main event between Steve Mean Machine Garcia and David Onama. Steve Garcia, one of my favorite featherweights. Very, very fun to watch. love this guy's fighting style. He's a fucking beast. 33 years old, 6 foot tall, 75-inch reach, 18-5 as a pro, 7-2 in the UFC. He has 14 wins by way of knockout, 78% KO rate, 4 wins by way of decision at 22%, giving Steve Garcia a 78% finishing rate, all by way of KO. Steve Garcia has only lost 1 time, and that was by way of KO. 20% of his losses, I'm sorry, he has not lost only 1 time, he's lost 5 times. He's lost another time by way of submission at 20%, and then his other 3 losses came by way of decision, 60%. His last 4 fights are wins over Calvin Kattar, Kyle Nelson, Sungwoo Choi, and Melquizael Costa. Right there, guys, those are 4 of... Melquizael Costa is like the guy that is just knocking off all of the just outside the ranking featherweights, okay? So a KO win over Melquizael is a huge feather in the cap of Steve Garcia. A win over Sungwoo Choi, same thing there. And a brutal KO over Kyle Nelson, another huge win. Now, David Onama, 31 years old, 5'11", 74-inch reach, 14-2 as a pro, 6-2 in the UFC. 7 wins by way of KO, 50% KO rate overall. 4 wins by way of submission, a 29% submission rate, giving him a 3 wins by way of decision at 21%, giving Onama a 79% finishing rate overall, just 1% better than Steve Garcia, and was only lost by way of decision, 2 losses at 100% decision loss rate. His last 4 fights got the win over Giga Chikadze, win over Roberto Romero, a win over Jonathan Pace, and a win over David Dos Santos. All decent level talent in the UFC. But in his last fight, though, against Giga Chikadze, definitely was getting caught quite a bit. And that's a bit worrisome because when we look at the strengths and weaknesses, like I said, Steve Garcia, not only is a durable chin, but a willingness to engage in firefights. And he is like so scrappy and loves a violent fucking fight. Like this dude loves to be in a violent fight. Very aggressive and high pressure striker. Very skilled at finding openings and shots on the feet against his opponents. I would say weaknesses for Steve Garcia. I think his takedown defense could potentially be tested in this matchup. And it's a 5-round fight. We haven't seen him in many 5-rounders because he had a huge finishing streak. I think the keys of victory for Steve Garcia, landing those crispy combinations he lands on the feet, staying off the ground, because David Onama will mix in those grappling attempts and wrestling. And I think if he is, being David Onama, is able to mount that offense from a wrestling perspective, then Steve Garcia needs to be very wise about getting back to his feet and not losing all of his gas in doing so. I think that Onama's a good fighter, guys. He can mix things up. He does have power on the feet, very good, strong wrestling base as well. But in my opinion, guys, I gotta go with my boy Steve Garcia getting this one done. I think he's been in there with the best of the featherweight division that is, outside the rankings at least. And he's proven himself time and time again with the hands. I feel like Steve Garcia, if he can shuck off takedowns, not allow David Onama to mount that offense from a takedown perspective, that Steve Garcia will find a finish inside of 5 rounds. I see him KOing David Onama. David Onama, although he's only lost by decision, he's been hurt on the feet so many times in fights, guys. I think that this is the matchup that is going to be prime for Steve Garcia to get another KO win in the main event. Those are my picks. Thank you guys so much if you made it this far. I know these can get a bit long, so I appreciate you if you've watched this far. If you want to enter my little holiday contest, comment Chucky below, and you will be entered. One of our subscribers in the last video watched all the way through, and I appreciate you. I'm going to put your name right up here. Try to join this holiday contest, or my guy, Ben Kim, will probably just win because no one else commented on the last video. So make sure if you're watching this that you comment Chucky below. Once again, thank you all so much for your support. Give this video a like, and please, if you aren't already, subscribe to Fite Feed so you can stay on top of all the new MMA content that I'll be posting. Thank you guys again. Happy Halloween. Chucky says goodbye, and we are